Thank you, Ambili. Thank you very much for having me here. This is quite special for me. We keep on doing talks for a large number of audience, particularly the last few days, last few 2 years, it has been a part of our lives. Not that I enjoy online mode all that much, but it does give us the opportunity to reach out to students in particular, because I don't think I would have traded this profession with anything else. That's the thing I like the best, doing talking and interacting with students and teaching. So that's my passion actually. So I'm really happy to talk to your students, and I can see some of our students also there. So what I'll try to do is, as the title tells you, the other two lectures I attended Professor Sinha's lecture, and I heard Dr. Thorat's, talk subsequently. Now, these two and the one which is to follow are general in nature, in the sense that they don't have a topic. So, in that sense, this particular talk is a little bit different because it focuses on employment and unemployment. So others talk about sources of secondary data, modes of interview, etc. Now, I would have been happy if current position, there was another specific talk on health, because these are the two things that we are negotiating with, the lives and employment and livelihoods. So this, at the current particular juncture, I feel that this topic might be of interest and of use to a large number of you if you want to work further on this. Now, just to start with, the previous speakers have spoken a little bit on secondary and primary data and the comparison of that. I just want to, and this is a story which I've told a large number of my students. We are all in the business, and hopefully your students are now at the moment in the undergraduate level, but I'm sure they would be contributing to their projects, etc., and hence producing some form of knowledge. Now, in social sciences, of course, in geography, one part is the physical, borrows from physical science, one part borrows from the, social world, the human geography part of it, and that makes the subject very unique. But particularly when we are talking about social sciences, it's a complex world. There are a large number of ways and aspects and very different kinds of facets that you can know it from. So all of us, when we are trying to actually gain knowledge, we are trying to what we think as understanding the reality better. Now here I'm going to share the story I was talking about. Now there was this, I forget the exact year, but I think maybe 10 years or 12 years back, there was this Chinese student which we had in our master's course, and I was ending the first semester economic geography class, which is a compulsory course for the first semester students. So we were generally having a celebration of sorts, and this boy, he had got some snacks from China. So he gave it to me, and I thanked him, and I opened the packet and I ate it, and I was going to share it. And then someone from the back, some other students, was just gesturing to me saying that you should not be having it, don't have it. So I had it by that time, and I was really liking the taste of it. Now, I asked him, what do you mean by are you saying? So he said, ma'am, this is some kind of a fried insect. So I immediately felt repelled by that, because the thought of eating an insect was not appealing to me. Now here, the example, this is a short story, nothing to do with research, but here are two kinds of knowledge that I had. One is that when I did not know what I was eating, and I thought of it just as a snack, a fried snack, I really enjoyed it. The other is when I was told actually what it was, I felt repelled by it. I didn't like it at all. So one of this is experience reality, which is I was experiencing and when I actually liked it. The other one is a agreement reality, where I've been probably told when I was a child that insects are not things which you should be having in my particular culture, but there are many other cultures which would have it as the food. So since I have grown up learning that is something like an agreement reality. Now in the research world also, there are these two forms of information. Let me put it that way. So we are talking about data. So these two forms of information, one which you experience yourself, and the other one which you pick up from secondary sources, which you pick up from literature, newspapers, which is not yours, which you are not experiencing. They are agreement reality. Now, in truth, there is no work like that, but I would suspect more than 90% of what we actually know comes from agreement reality, not from experience reality. Now, therefore, what I'm trying to argue is it's not only important in research of what we know and what the questions we ask to find that out, which are very important, but also how we know it. Where from we know it. So here comes, and so therefore the construction of the social reality which we are trying to understand would depend very much also, among other things, on how we acquire a particular form of knowledge, which brings us to the empirical basis of primary and secondary data, which both Amit and Professor Sinha has talked about. Let me just add to that a little bit. Now, when should you be using primary data? I feel that, of course, there are good reasons to be using primary data, go to the field, etc. That really teaches you a lot. But other than that, if you take it from the perspective of research, generally primary data can't compete with secondary data, which has a huge machinery, most of the time state machinery, to collect that information in terms of its coverage, because the coverage is much, much bigger. In terms of cost also, it costs us a lot. So, and the time taken is also a lot. But these two things which are marked in red, that is the reason we would like to do primary data, and sometimes along with the secondary data. So depth or the purpose. So the depth of the data geared towards the exact question which you are asking would make probably not be attended to by the secondary data which is available in a particular format, a given format, and that may or may not, that might also, but may not also attend to the exact questions that you are asking. So you might want to know that. So these are information which you don't get otherwise through the secondary data. Then there is this very important issue of complementarity, triangulation. Complementarity is you find a certain thing from the secondary data in terms of a broader coverage. You come up with certain trends, but you're not able to explain that trend. I will give you, even though that's not what I have set out doing, but I will give you an example from work that I have been involved in recently as to how this complementarity works. Then triangulation is something which you find something which is unexpected from the secondary data, and you try to validate that through the primary data. Try and see whether it holds good for the primary data as well. And then there are contradictions sometimes, and we should welcome contradictions in social sciences when we are trying to do that part of, trying to understand society, because it is full of contradictions. So either to resolve contradictions, so your primary data might say something, your secondary data might say something else, and, so it could be resolving contradiction or enhancing contradiction, and you might come up with the conclusion that, from the secondary data we have got this broad trend, but it does not hold good. There are certain, if we kind of cater for certain other things or set out our research design as something else, then we get quite different results. At least it does not. Or expansion. Expansion means that you might want to expand on what the secondary data tells you and add to it in terms of issues. So now currently we are located in a pandemic and all of us are finding it extremely difficult. Amit gave a very nice lecture on telephonic survey. So that's one of the ways that you could do it. You could also go to the field if you are able to travel without actually interacting too much. And that's a very incomplete way of doing a primary survey. But however, there is a very powerful thing, and that's not the topic that I have taken today, but observation using photographs as data, as a material for research. All of that you can do actually without coming very in close touch. So there are ways and ways in which you can still do primary data. Now today my purpose is to actually talk about employment, unemployment, secondary data, and some of it is going to be very, very boring because it's really quite technical in nature. But I think, and you may or may not remember it subsequently when you actually, hopefully some of you would work on it, and but you hopefully will still get an idea of what the potential problems, limitations, differences from the different sources of data would be. And so I will be interspersing that. So I will discuss 3 sources of secondary data. Now, before I come to that, I think in the current position, it's important to know as to why employment and unemployment is particularly important currently, and it has actually been important in India for the last 4, 5, 6 years, because our unemployment was somewhere around 2% only. I mean, I'll tell you how unemployment is measured subsequently, but it's 2% of the total labor force. So, which is low, and that would be the average, 1 point something, 1.8, and maximum, if it went up above 3%, we would be very concerned. But before the pandemic, we had reached the level, I mean, validated from 2 data sources, in fact, that I'll be talking about, went up to 6%, which is quite high in terms of the current, long-term rates of unemployment that we have had. Now, post-lockdown, 2020, in April, May, it went up to 24%, according to the CMI data. That also I'll introduce you to. 24% is huge. You can understand 2% to 24%. Then it recovered somewhat to the pre-lockdown levels. But then current May, because we have had the second wave, and please remember, we haven't had a nationwide lockdown. It has still again gone up to 14-15%, which is still very, very high. Even without a national lockdown. So different states have been doing different things, etc. Now, more concerning is the fact that this year, 2021, 20 million jobs have been lost, particularly concerning for youngsters and younger generation like all of you, in less than 5 months. And most of these have been regular salaried work. Industry, by and large, have been operating in this year around 66% of its capacity because there is no demand, and therefore, we don't see the jobs picking up. Now, also the other aspect currently is that this loss of job and unemployment is not being felt equally. So on the one hand, you have very large companies making, in fact, highest ever profit in the last 2 years, and the labor side of it has felt all the distress. And within the larger labor force, The lower income groups, the younger population, women and minority groups have been, and data is there currently to show us that they have really borne the brunt of the lockdown and the pandemic. And 2021 employment situation is a little different from 2021's. In the 2020, the job losses that we have had, even though the unemployment rates were higher, the rural areas did not face a massive problem. So it went on quite as usual, and they actually boosted up the economy in a large way. But currently, the unemployment comes from equally both from rural and urban areas. So 2021 scenario, which is actually quite distributed, and already all of you know that the pandemic has reached the rural area. Part of the reason is this, part of the reason is that the crop has not done as well as the last year. Now, this is not a temporary thing, even though we see that the unemployment had recovered, but it has a potential effect on the youth and women. And because they are the starting, particularly younger women, married women, who might never actually join back the labor force. And that is again what some of the literature which is available, which uses CMI data, unit level, that is raw data, it gives us that kind of a result. And for the youth who are just joining the jobs, they might be underselling their skills. So they would have otherwise joined at a very high level. They might be joining at a low level or not getting jobs at all, which might make them less and less unemployable, because over a period of time, they'll have more competition. So more new batches will come and they'll be competing with that. So it would have a potential generational impact. So it's extremely important, I think, in the current period to understand. So my purpose would be to tell you about the different secondary sources of data, and then tell you some of the broad concepts, which is what I was describing as quite technical and dry. And I'll intersperse that when I will be talking about the three sources of data, which I've marked in red here. I will intersperse it with some of the work which I have done, or either small part of the work which I've done, or at least a portion of that. And it's not comprehensive at all, but it might throw up certain issues which people might feel interested about. So Ministry of Labour, the first source is Labour Bureau and the Director General of Employment and Training, but they give us different kinds of data. So Annual Survey of Industry, for example, which covers the formal industry, that has a labour component. It gives us publications on rural labour inquiry. It gives us occupational wage surveys, but when you talk about wages, you must understand there is a large number of our working population which are engaged in self-employed category, that they employ themselves, like say a person who is a vegetable seller or a tea shop owner. They are self-employed people, so it doesn't cover them. Also, labor conditions of target groups and certain details about labor laws. So while you should know this, I will not be covering this. Then you have the National Sample Survey Organization. Until quite recently, this was actually till 2016 actually. 2011-12 was the last time we had an unemployment survey. This is a sample, as the name suggests to you, and Professor Sina had already mentioned the difference between census and a sample. In census, you cover all the households. You cover 100% of the household. In sample, you take few households to represent the larger population. So National Sample Survey has been an extremely important source, which used to come up with employment-unemployment survey till 11-12. Now it has been substituted by periodic labor force survey, or PLFS, which gives you similar kind of data, but it's not strictly speaking comparable with the employment-unemployment survey, because some methodological issues have changed. The way the samples are drawn, the way the questions are asked, the methods of collecting data. So that's a shame. Shouldn't have been the case, but that actually is the case. Then you have the census of India, where you can get this information on workers from the primary census abstract and from the B series of census in great detail. And then you have the CSO, Central Statistical Organization, which collects information, employment data through economic census. That is, it collects it through the enterprises, like the annual survey of industry, which is just a part of it, that is formal manufacturing sector. But this is all the economic census. But again, they miss out on the self-employed people. And the private agency that I would like to talk about is Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and that's actually become a very important data source, particularly currently, because it has a very high frequency of data, and it has covered from 2016 onwards. It gives us 4 monthly data. Every 4 months, it gives us information. So broadly, if you try and compare, so all the other first four are government sources. If you compare census and sample, the first is, of course, as I said, census covers all the households, and therefore it takes a lot more time. And NSSO is a sample. And just to give you an idea, the 68th round or the last employment-unemployment survey has had surveyed just over 1 lakh households and 4.5 lakh plus people, and at the individual level, understanding their employment. So the PLFS has similar kind of 1.02 lakh households and 4.33 persons it interviews. The periodicity is different. Census is, many of you would be knowing, it comes once in 10 years. The NSSO, the employment-unemployment survey till that time was a quinquennial survey. Every 5 years it used to come out. And then there was a gap, and then the PLFS is supposed to come every year, but we currently have only 2 rounds of it. And for the urban, it's supposed to come every thrice in like the CMI data, it's supposed to come every 4th month, so thrice. But it's a little strange to me because the seasonality aspect is far more in rural, and it has some kind of a urban bias compared to the employment-unemployment survey. So in those ways, it is a little different. The concepts which I'll be coming to of workers' employment and unemployment is a little different as to how they are looked at it. Try and explain that. Depth at which the data is available, that's very important. That to the user, the census data, even though, of course, its obvious advantage is that it covers all the households, okay? But it is available to you in an aggregated format. So with a huge time lag, it's available for the villages also, at the village level also, some bits of the data. But otherwise, it's available till up to the district level for a larger number of indicators. But it's at the aggregate level. So you are not able to, so for example, if you wanted to cross-classify and look at, how, the worker status or unemployment or employment dependent on other factors, it's much harder to do it with the census data. For NSSO, you actually get it you have the reports also where it's available at the state level and the aggregated level, but you can actually for a reasonable price buy the unit level data. So you can get it at the person level. So you get the raw data and you can work with that, and you have much more flexibility to, the analytical potential is quite high. And the depth of the data, that is the amount of information which is available, is far richer in NSSO compared to the census. So coming to the concept, so I'll be treating these two things together. So first I'll be going with the census, but before that, let me tell you a little bit information about what is considered work. Now there's a lot of, people have challenged the way work itself is measured, and one of the main reasons why they have challenged is because the way work is measured, women's work is undercounted in a manner of speaking. So what we count as work is what is SNA, is System of National Accounting. So within the System of National Accounting, what we count as work, and this is same across the board, irrespective of which data source that you go into, formal employment, and by formal employment, I don't mean employment in the formal sector, but paid work, something which you are paid for. Other things like household primary production of goods, say you are a farmer, you are growing crops, you will sell it, you could exchange it, you could market it, but you are not getting a wage for it because you're working on your old field, and you might use it for self-consumption. I'll come to that in a minute. You could actually at the household level produce non-primary production of goods, baskets, gold, maybe oil, ghani oil, etc. All of this at the household level, construction and services for income, some services which you are operating from the household level. Then the second, which is outside the SNN System of National Accounting productive boundary, but these are productive work actually if you look at it. So household services for your own use. So services which you do for yourself, like say cooking, cleaning, etc. Collecting of fuel, water, etc. This is one which is outside the purview of what is counted as work. Also, unpaid care work. So you take care of the elderly, you take care of the child and your other family members. And you can understand where I'm going, and household volunteer work. But the first two in particular are primarily done by women. And that is why, and these are all what is known in the literature as expenditure saving work. That is, if the woman was not to do this, you would actually have to pay money to be able to get this done. And these are very central to the household survival, and probably will not have the same quality of work even then. So at the very least, they're expenditure saving, and they're productive in that sense. So, but they are outside the work. Now, where there is nobody has a doubt, even the feminist scholars who have redefined work by including this group to understand how much of time women spend on both of these as opposed to only this. The non-productive work, which is called non-productive work, is for your personal well-being. I mean, of course, it adds on to the economy and the society at large, but learning, socializing, cultural, commitments or engagement, entertainment, sports, mass media, personal care, hobbies, games, etc., which are meant only for yourself, they are not counted as work by anybody at all. So now currently the data sources that I'll be talking about only considers this as work. Now, before again I go into the thing, two other things that you need to know, that there are which sector that you are working in is very important in the data system, and that is known as the National Industrial Classification Code, or the NIC code, and it tells you, it goes from a 2-digit level to actually 8-digit level, but many so when you go to a 4-digit level, there are it's a sort of 5-digit level. There are 1304 classes. So there are NICs at various points of time where these classifications have been changed. The latest one is 2008, but you can draw a comparison between the earlier systems. So it's not all that difficult. This is just one of the examples that I'm giving, that as you go on from manufacturing into very specific thing at the 5-digit level, it might look like that. I don't want to spend time, but I can share the presentation with you subsequently. Then there is something which is a NCO classification or occupational classification. So these data, these codes are given both in census and in NSSO, and you actually figure out depending on, I mean, of course, they go down to different levels of detail, but this is something, again, an example of that would be this kind of a thing, that skilled agricultural, forestry and fishery worker, then it comes to only agricultural worker, then market gardener as you come down in the ladder, and ultimately field crop vegetable grower, cultivator, cultivator general. In cultivator you have paddy cultivator, wheat cultivator who only exclusively cultivate that. So there will be various, so this is a 8-digit level classification. So from 6 you go on to 8 digits. So these are two broad things to know. Now both census and NSSO covers work as all persons, irrespective of age and sex, who participated in any economically productive activity. And you remember what is economically productive, the first box that I was talking about, for any length of time during the reference period, are called as workers. And normally it's an activity which results in production of goods and services for exchange, but it could be paid or unpaid, but normally this is the case. But there is an exception which is made for crops and rearing of animals and milk production for self-consumption. That is also considered as work, even if it is not for exchange. So these are the 3 exceptions which are there. In the activities, like, again, there is a, a lot of people have raised, challenged this kind of measuring. Prostitution, begging, smuggling one can understand, but about sex work, for example, there are a lot of feminist scholars who say that that should be counted as work, but currently these are not, even though this may result in earning, by convention they were not considered as gainful, so to say. So they are left outside the purview of work. Now, when you go to census, there are lots and lots of things to share, but I have only very little time, and probably I'll but I'm giving just the broad contours. So the basic categories are main worker, marginal worker, non-worker, and those seeking or available for work. Now, what is a main worker? Main worker is a person who in the last year has worked for 6 months or more. So whatever is the reference time. So whenever the census surveyor goes to the person, the last 1 year, so a person would have had to be working for 6 months or more to be counted as a main worker. Marginal worker is somebody who's worked less than 6 months. So one problem in census, and I'll come to that later, is that, suppose it's 5 months and 5.5 months, and somebody has worked just 6 months. So you are categorized differently, even though in reality there may not be that much of difference. So currently in 2011 census, it's a little improved because they again divide this into people who have worked less than 3 months and between 3 to 6 months. And then there is a non-worker category, which is kind of a loose category. When I come to the NSSO, you'll kind of understand why I'm saying this. Anybody who did not work in the reference period, and there are those who sought work. Now, seeking work or available for work has been asked, this question has been asked both to the marginal worker and the non-worker. Now, there's a problem there because even a main worker, so I might have worked for 6 months and I'm a graduate and I've still done manual work and I want to get better work. That is something that the census assumes that is not there. Even that, so one thing which you can do from, I think it has not been done too much, you could explore from here is when the percentage, the share of marginal worker who are seeking or work or available for work, as the census reports it, that's some kind of an indicator of underemployment. But it would have been better if the same thing was asked to even the male workers. So they could also be potentially underemployed. And then, of course, it is asked to the non-workers also. So, and it's somewhat loose here, and this is something which I'll come to later. The CMI data actually improves on this. This is what gives you the unemployment data, and that really improves on this particular set of information. Now, just to give you, these are census maps. I have not got it done myself, but you can just see from the state level mapping, the red shade is the lowest category. Now, if you first see, this is male workers, percentage, I will define, I mean, I should have defined this earlier, but subsequently just hold on. I'll define work participation rate, labor force participation rate, and unemployment rate a little later when I do the NSSO, and it's measured the same way. So this is an indicator of the share of people who have been working, who are workers. So the red part is the least lowest category. So you can see that over a period of time, by judging by this map, the situation for males and females have improved. I mean, by and large, if you go by the red, and I mean, Gujarat, for example, has deteriorated for the female work participation, but by and large, you do from the map see, you would interpret as it improved. But this is one point that I want to bring forth to all of you as geographers. This is taken from a gender atlas where I was one of the people who was participating in it. Professor Saraswati Raju and Dr. Bhaswati Das were my colleagues. We did it together with a large number of students funded by the DST. Now, this is one map which shows you it does it a little differently. Now, these are only male work participation rate, that is share of workers to the total population. Here it is not age group specific, but you could measure it by age group. Here it measures the women workers divided by the women population. Here what it does is the ratio of female to male work participation rate. Now, if you saw there could be economic distress because of which both may have reduced, or maybe an economic upturn because of which both have improved. But that does not give you an indication of a gender situation. But when you relate it, that is, if you divide the female work participation divided by the male work participation, then you actually, it gives you in relation to the male work participation, what has happened. So this is a comparison of the 2001 and 2011 census, and all the shades that you see in pink and red are those which has become worse. That is, female in relation to men have become worse, and the greens are ones where they have improved. So you see, even though here it looks, when you look at the female work participation, and there are two reasons for it. One is that it is only mapped at the state level. When you go to the district level, the picture is different. And secondly, when you relate it to the male work participation, which is a much more robust indicator for evaluating a gender, you see a completely different picture. I would take questions later. So there are some examples from the gender atlas that I just wanted to point out, which might be interesting for you. This is female work participation separately and male work participation from the 2011 census. The difference is that it is done for the working age group, so 15 to 59 age group, whereas this one is for accrued work participation rate. This is only for the working age group. Now you see in both, there is a north-south divide. In rural areas, this is for rural. However, there are significant differences in the sense that in the Indo-Gangetic plain, it is much more sharper for women, and as you move within the Indo-Gangetic plain from towards the developed side, that is Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, the female, you see a lighter shade of yellow, it further reduces. That is more developed agriculturally, the ratios further fall for women, which is not the case for men. Here it is the level of development. So Bihar is the most underdeveloped districts out of the whole lot here, and the men work participation rate actually follows that. Then there are other significant differences. I have less time. I can come back to it if you people are interested. But there, now in urban, there is a significant difference. There is a rough. Is there somebody saying something? Yes. Okay. Should I continue? I can hear someone.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Okay. So there is a north-south divide here, rough north-south divide, which is kind of not as sharp as the rural one, but there is roughly a east-west divide when you come to the men. Now, again, if you look at the levels of development, you will say that, I mean, barring some exceptions, of course, Rajasthan, say, for example, which has actually come up in the last few years, but this is exceptional. But generally, the western side is more developed compared to the eastern side, roughly, very roughly speaking. Again, there are exceptions. I'm not saying it fits exactly, but there are differences in the urban. So to say. Now, when we look at women seeking work, it's one thing to look at the data, but how are you going to interpret that? One way is to say that it is an indicator of unemployment and it's a negative indicator. But the other way to look at it is that a lot of women, if there are high percentage of women seeking jobs, then it's a good thing, because given the kind of gender norms that we have in India, of course, it varies spatially, and Kerala is one of the very important departures from the rest of the country, where it's much higher than the rest of the country. Of course, you will see Northeast Kerala, West Bengal to some extent. But generally, there is a restriction of women working in public spaces or going out for work, particularly after they're married, sometimes even before they're married. So if you look at it from that social space or gender space, you can actually look at this as an indicator, which also tells you that there is a large proportion, wherever this is high, there is a large proportion of women who are still looking for work. Part of the reason they're looking for work is that they are not getting job, and that's bad. It's because of distress, economic distress. But part of the reason, for example, let me point out 4 different areas. When you compare the work participation and this map together, 4 areas actually emerge. Indo-Gangetic plains, which are low work participation, low women seeking job, share of women seeking job. So this is a very, very kind of a restricted space for women, and it's not looked on, women going for work if they can help it, that if the families can help it, is not looked on as something which is good. West Bengal is a departure from this pattern in the Indo-Gangetic plains. So West Bengal and Kerala have low, at least in rural areas, they have low work participation, but very high percentage of women seeking job. What does this mean? Of course, you have to, these are the reasons why you would want to do primary surveys, because we can only conjecture. One of the reasons why this could happen, and in Kerala's case, it's most definitely the case, large share of young women are in higher education. And that is one of the reasons when you actually compare that chunk of women are in education and therefore not in the workforce. So there is generally a low work participation rate because you divide it by the population. But the high percentage of women seeking job might actually mean, it also could mean that there are women who are able to hold out till they get jobs of their own choice. This is one way of looking at it, to be validated by the field. As I was saying, that some could be a distress situation, that they're not able to get the employment at all. but some could be they are getting employment, but they are not choosing not to do it. So I think it's a combination of both. Then there is Maharashtra, which has a high work participation rate, but a low percentage of women seeking job. And then Tamil Nadu and most of Northeast India, which is high and high, both. I mean, both work participation. Don't have the time, otherwise, I mean, I can come with a discussion. Now, marginal worker and main worker, the main thing I want to point out for the uninitiated to this kind of a data is that there is a huge gender division in this, that there is a large percentage of women, particularly in the rural area, who have higher share of, who do a higher share of marginal work. Say, for example, because they have to do the care work and the second, if you remember the second box that I showed, and they already have a household and domestic chores to do, they work part-time for the livestock, they work part-time for, in the field and not in a full-time capacity, or during the peak labor period, and so on and so forth. So that is why that's much higher, and this difference is very high in rural compared to the urban. Over a period of time, more men have been going on to the marginal work. If you see this map, you will actually see the reverse. There were lower percentage of marginal work overall. This is not by gender, but it has become definitely higher, which is not a good news. So over a period of time, the share of marginal work, so men actually are doing multiple kinds of work. They are not able to sustain themselves with only one main work, and that is a sign of economic distress. Now, when we go to NSSO, it's slightly more complicated than the census. So initially, to give you just an overview, anybody who's asked the questions are divided into three groups. First is working or being engaged in economic activity or work, and there are definitions of that which I'll be coming to. Not being engaged in economic activity but are making tangible effort for seeking work or being available for work if work is available. I want you to note this. This is how NSSO defines the basis of unemployment. That is, either they are making direct effort to seek work, or they are available for work when work is available. That's a very restricting kind of a thing. I mean, I might be available to work when work is not available, and therefore I'm not looking for work, which is the current status during the pandemic. So it misses out on those set of people which CMI actually captures. And the last is not being engaged in any economic activity and not also available for work. Now, I was telling you how to measure this. Labor force participation rate is A plus B divided by the entire population, which is A plus B plus C. So this is your labor force participation. That is, both people who are working and are looking for work or available for work divided by the total population into 100 is your labor force participation rate, and this gives you what is the stock of labor which is available, can be worked for male, female, rural, urban, whichever way. Workforce participation rate is only A divided by the whole population, or A plus B plus C, if you like. So that is workforce participation. Unemployment rate, the denominator also changes. It is B, that is people who are seeking work or are available for work in the particular way that I've defined. For NSSO, this applies for census also, is measured exactly in the same way, divided by the total labor force, which is A plus B, that is workers and those available for work. So this is the unemployment rate. You could do a share of the unemployed of the total population, but that would not be the unemployment rate as we understand it. So this you don't have to focus on, but there are different in the work category, and NSSO actually divides them into several kind of enterprises. You don't have to. There are four broad divisions here. One is self-employed, and I described who employ themselves. So Tata Birla could be a self-employed person, but Thelawala, that is a tea shop owner, a very poor vegetable seller, is also a self-employed. So it's a mixed bag. So within this, you have different kinds of categories, and one is self-employed as helper. Lot of women, let me point out, are in this category because they are in unpaid family work. They are in a family enterprises. They are not in the decision making power, but they are working nevertheless. So these are also indicator of unpaid work. Then you have self-employed regular salaried work, which you will know what it means. Casual wage work, where there is no security, and this is every day. Unless you work, you don't get paid. And there is one category which is in work but did not work during this time for various reasons. Sickness, but they have retained the work nevertheless. It could be because of sickness, it could be due to other reasons in various categories. So these are the ways, categories of workers of NSSO. Then, of course, there is not working or seeking or available for work. This is also a little bit, somewhat problematic in the sense that I feel that it tends to undercount unemployment. And in that sense, I feel the CMI measure of unemployment is a better and more robust kind of unemployment, even though it gives two kinds of unemployment, and I'll come to that. Then, of course, there are people not working, and I forgot to tell, even these kinds of similar kind of splitting up is there in the census also. For the non-worker, it's again split up into various categories like this. Then, one of the important features of NSSO is there are three statuses, which I'll come to later. But usual status is when you are asking the person for the last 365 days, which is how the census also does it. Last 365 days, what is the status? But there is a difference in which census records the data and NSSO records them as workers in particular. Now, I told you that there are these three divisions that anybody initially in NSSO is divided into. And this division is done by the major time criteria, not necessarily 6 months. So suppose I have not worked and maybe I was just studying for say 5 months. Okay, 3 months or 4 months I was working, and 2 months I was looking for work. So by the major time criteria, I would be put as a non-worker out of the labor force, because that is the maximum time that I've spent in this entire year doing this. So by the major time, so not necessarily 6 months, but out of all the things that you have done, what is it in which you have spent the maximum amount of time? That is how the first classification of whether you belong to the worker category, unemployed category, or out of the labor force category. That is how it will be divided. So in that sense, it's different. And then, so there is a principal status. So what is your main work that you have done? So it is possible that I am a housewife primarily, so I am classified in the principal status as a non-worker doing domestic duties primarily. But I also spend some time tending to the livestock, which is most often many rural area cases, and that is why I was telling you the marginal workers in the census, the women percentages are high. Same with the subsidiary status. Then I will be a non-worker in the usual principal status. I will be a worker in the subsidiary status when I would be doing, when I'm working on livestock or farm. There could also be a case where I'm working on something, say I'm for the major time criteria, so I have worked for 9 months in the last year. But out of that, I have worked 6 months in the farm as a farm laborer and as a non-farm construction worker. Then that will be mine. So I'm worker in both the statuses, but I am, when you go to the NIC classification, I would have worked as an agricultural laborer here. I would have worked as a construction laborer here. So this is the way. This is to actually get an idea of a fuller kind of a way of unemployment and employment to measure employment. Now, NSSO also gives you three kind of status. One is a usual status, which I was describing, that is 365 days. It gives you a weekly status where you are asked last 7 days what you have been doing. Now, in that, even if you have worked for out of 1 day into 7 days, at least for 1 hour, you are classified as a worker in the current weekly status. 1 hour in that 7 days for even 1 day. And if you have done the same, suppose you have not worked, so that gets precedence, then you have been seeking work. So if you are not working, but you have been seeking work only 1 day in 1 hour, then you will be put as unemployed, in the labor force. And if you have done none of this, then only in the current weekly status you are classified as non-workers. So this estimates, of course, it matches to a very large extent. There are differences, as you can understand. Then there is a daily status, and the only reason that last day, if I'm asking today, yesterday what you have done. And it classifies both in the principal and the subsidiary status, as I was telling you, for the last days, that have I been doing 2 different jobs, and it is different from usual status principal and subsidiary, where I might be doing 2 different jobs in different points of time. So here that's different, but the reason why this is important is it gives you another measure of disguised unemployment or underemployment, because it gives you, of course, it does not give you full-fledged kind of, it would have been very good if it gave you number of hours that you have worked. So there's an 8-hour day. If you have worked for 2 hours, you are underemployed, but it gives you half day or full day. That is 4 hours or less, or 4 hours, more than that. So that's all it gives. So that is the only purpose of it. Now I show you some of the trends which I promised you to do. So we had done a work for Australian government actually in 2019. Our report came out, and if you look at this, we had compared Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, but Eastern Gangetic Plain, that was our work. But this particular graph will also show you the rest of India. So this is the rest of India. This is the rest of India for women. This is the Indo-Gangetic Plain for women. So you actually see that what I want to bring your attention to, that from 83 onwards, there's a fall in women work participation rate for the overall for India. In Eastern Gangetic Plain, it's even less. Now, 2015, please don't look at it. We had to extend the data. This is a Labor Bureau data, which of course the definitions are okay, but the sample sizes are different. So really not comparable but you do see, and that's a lot of drop. That's like somewhere from above 40% of work participation rate. Now you know what it means. It has come down to less than 30%. So that's a huge fall, and that's something which a lot of researchers are deeply. I myself am very keen in work and understanding, and this particular work was in Nepal and Bangladesh. You actually see that the work participation rates are far higher, the relative and the absolutes. And in Bangladesh, it was started much lower. Say in 95, 96, only 17%, which was 40% in 83 for India. It has gone up to 33%, which is, close to India now. So it has actually improved a lot. Now, I also want to tell you that if you wanted to plot the work participation with the age, in any one period, the general thing is that whether male or female, it will look like an inverted U-shaped curve, like this things are looking. So this is the India thing, this is the Bangladesh thing, this is the Nepal thing, just to share with you. So here it compares 2004-5 data with 11-12 data of NSSO. You can see that there is a fall, and the fall, some people had argued that it is because more women are going to study now. Now, in fact, that gap is more for men. This gap is very little for women. You do see that in the prime of the working age, the fall is actually there, which is a matter of great concern. So you, even from secondary data, when you actually manipulate and you use it and analyze it in different ways, you get a lot of information, even though you don't go to the primary level. In Bangladesh, see, earlier it wasn't an inverted U-shaped curve for women. It was straight down, because after marriage, this is the average age at marriage, there was a significant fall. But over a period of time, it is starting to resemble an inverted U-shaped curve, which actually means that kind of bias is actually going. In Nepal, there is an increase, but the increase is at the cost of the elderly population, because the youth of Nepal is actually migrating out for other jobs, some to India, some to other parts of Nepal. So agriculture actually is falling on the shoulder of the elderly. So from this simple data, you actually can understand a lot. I'm just showing this. These are part of our work, but I just thought that you might be interested in this. Now, I was telling you the complementarity of primary secondary data. So we did not know why this fall had happened, and we specifically did some surveys in Bengal and Bihar, which was our cases in 2 states that we had done. And one of the things that we saw from the field, we are not claiming that this is an overarching reason, but the exploratory field work that we actually showed that there was a huge amount of land use change. And in one of the villages that we visited, and this is from the Google image, the entire field, agricultural field, is submerged, and it has been converted into pisciculture. So fish is being grown and it is being contracted out. So all the women who were working here, some of the men who were working have got jobs here, the other men have migrated out and working, but the women who were working here are less mobile. So these are actually some photographs which we took during the field work, who were earlier working and now are not working, not the child but others. So just to tell you that, just to give you a flavor of the field. Now coming to the CMI report. I'm sorry I have taken a lot of time, but I'm just finishing. I must tell you about this. There are lots of things which CMI collects, and it's a private agency. You have free reports which are downloadable at the aggregate level, but raw data is priced, and it's even NSSO data, raw data is priced, but this is priced, has a higher price. They come up with free reports per year, so data frequency is more. Available from only 2016, so not from way back, but we have a huge data gap in the government sources from 11-12 onwards, and the PS comes in 17-18 and 18-19, and you cannot compare it with the 11-12 data because the method and the data collection, the sample design has changed. So this is one of the things, at least, which gives us constant data every 3 months. And you can actually do it at the raw data unit level data. So if you could do that, you would actually could do a lot. And the size of sample, interestingly, it's a little larger than NSSO. In fact, it is not less. And there are new sets of information, which I was telling you about the unemployment rate. In particular, I want to focus on that. So you see, none of the other data gives us this COVID effect. Now, this is from August 19 unemployment rate to May 21, as recent as that. So you see 24%, I was telling you, this is the rural, urban and total unemployment rate, which went up, and it's again going up. It's gone up to double digit after the second wave. And this is what I was telling you, it is worrying, and we know all that from the CMI data only. Otherwise, it will not have been possible for us to understand the degree of unemployment. Now, one of the important things which I wanted to bring to your notice was the CMI data measures employment in 2 different ways. One is normal unemployment rate, the other is greater unemployment rate. Now, what is that? Similarly, there is a greater labor force participation. Now, what is that? The difference between that is the unemployment rate only includes people who are actively looking for work. who don't have work actively looking for work. The greater unemployment rate also takes into account those people who are not only actively looking for work, but people who are available for work but not looking for work at all. Now, this second category is, I mean, not necessarily excluded totally, but the way they look at it and the way they measure it, it's very likely excluded. Now, this has a very, I mean, I'm interested in gender, and that is why I want to bring this thing to your notice, that if you took the September, December 19, which is pre-COVID, and just the post-COVID ending April, you would see that both for males and females, whether you look at it in urban or rural, the greater unemployment rate, the difference between this was 1 for men. The difference between this is 4.9, almost 5% for men. That is, a lot more people are available for work, but there's no work, they're still looking for work. But this difference is huge for women. 7%. It was 10.9, it's 17.2, a little less than that. Here in rural area, 1.2 and 3, here it's 7.8 and 12.5. So women and some of the people who have actually worked, some Azim Premji University, worked with the raw data, they have come to the conclusion that women are 7 times more likely to lose job during a nationwide lockdown. Women are 11 times more likely compared to men likely not to return to work subsequently. That is why I was telling you initially, it's an intergenerational effect, could be for women and the youth. Marriage had contrasting effect on men and women. So married women are restricted, where married men are more likely because they are looked as the breadwinner. Muslim women and young women are even more deprived than the usual women, other women. So they are more likely not to return to work than other women. So just to sum up what I have said, to compare these three, I've already told you in terms of periodicity, census is 10 yearly, NSSO is 5 yearly, now annual. But again, we don't have, there is a time lag, and I'll talk about it. And CMI is 3 monthly. Time lag, what I mean is that when the data is available to when the data is published. Now, census is sometimes a decade time lag. That is, some of the data you get almost after 9 or 10 years. So at least 4 or 5 years lag is there. NSSO and what we are seeing from PLFS, maybe it's because of the COVID situation, 1 year to 2 years. CMI, there is no lag absolutely. So you get the data immediately. So I was showing you May 2021 data already. Detail of information, moderate. This is the highest level of information that you get. Moderate, but with some uniqueness. I mean, like the unemployment thing that which is very useful, I think. Data resolution, aggregates are only available. Both these are available. Raw data is available if you so wish. And data continuity, 1881 onwards, of course, definitions have changed and there are lots of things which you can't compare till 71. But at least, I mean, it's huge, long period of time. Here, the first unemployment thing was done in 72, 73 for the first time, but it stopped at 11, 12, as I was telling you, unemployment survey. The periodic labor force survey has been started with the same thing, but unfortunately, these can't be compared. So this is a huge problem. This is available from 2016 without a break. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that I've taken up so much of time.